The stench of death hung heavy over the battlefield, a miasma of spilled blood, burnt chitin, and the sickly sweet rot of jungle decay. Faustus Rice, veteran soldier of the Drydus Confederation, moved through the carnage with the grim efficiency of long practice, his plasma rifle sweeping the churned earth, his eyes scanning for any flicker of life amidst the corpses. It was a task he had performed 100 times before, a duty that had become as much a part of him as the scars that crisscrossed his battle-worn body. For 2 long years, he had been a gleaner on the battlefields of Crawler Prime, the planet the Drydus soldiers had come to know as a verdant hell, a world where even the very earth seemed to war against them. Faustus paused beside the shattered carapace of a massive crunchy warrior, its chitinous plate split by a plasma bolt, its foul ichor seeping into the muddy ground. The bug's mandibles still twitched, its compound eyes glittering with a fading malevolence. Faustus raised his rifle, put a single shot through the creature's brain. A mercy kill, a final act of humanity in a war that had long since abandoned such luxuries. He moved on, picking his way through the tangled bodies of the fallen. Drydus soldiers, their once proud armor dented and scorched, lay intertwined with the crushed forms of crunchy drones, a final embrace of mortal enemies. Faustus knelt beside each human corpse, checking for any sign of life, any flicker of breath or pulse. But there was none to be found, only the stillness of the grave and the buzzing of carrion flies. It was a scene he had witnessed countless times, a tableau of death and ruin that had etched itself indelibly into his mind. Each fallen soldier was a weight upon his soul, a silent accusation of failure, of the price paid for Drydus's ambition. And yet he knew that price was one that must be paid if the Confederation was to claim its destiny among the stars. For Crawler Prime was a prize beyond measure, a world rich in resources and strategic importance. Its vast jungles held untold riches, its teeming biosphere a bounty that could feed the hungry billions of Drydus's sprawling cities. And its position at the nexus of several key warp lanes made it a linchpin of any future Drydus expansion. But to claim this prize, the Confederation had to first wrest it from the grasp of the Crunchies, the insectoid horrors that had evolved to dominate this world. For a decade, the war had raged, a grinding, brutal conflict fought in the claustrophobic confines of the jungle, where every tree could conceal a crunchy ambush, every shadow could hide a chittering swarm. Faustus had been there from the start, had seen the toll the war had taken on his fellow soldiers. He had watched as the eager, fresh-faced recruits had been ground down by the relentless horror of the fighting, their youthful idealism and patriotic fervor slowly leached away by the unending cycle of violence and death. And he had changed too, hardened by the crucible of war into something cold and unyielding. The man he had been, the man who had dreamed of glory and adventure, had died on the battlefields of Crawler Prime, replaced by a grim reaper in Drydus Green, a soldier who knew only duty and the bitter taste of survival. A sudden movement caught Faustus's eye, a flicker of life amidst the charnel waste. He moved swiftly, his rifle raised, his senses razor-sharp. There, half buried beneath the shattered carapace of a crunchy drone, was a Drydus soldier, his armor cracked and oozing blood, but his chest still rising and falling with the shallow breaths of the grievously wounded. Faustus was at the man's side in an instant, his hands moving with the surety of long practice. He checked the soldier's vitals, applied pressure to the worst of the bleeding. Then, with a voice roughened by the smoke of 1,000 battlefields, he called out over the din of the jungle. "Medic! Over here, now!" The words were a lifeline, a slender thread of hope in a world gone mad with death. Faustus had spoken them many times before, had seen the gratitude in the eyes of the wounded, had heard the whispered prayers of those who thought themselves abandoned. It was a small thing, perhaps, in the grand scheme of this vast and terrible war. A single life saved, a flicker of light against the encroaching darkness. But for Faustus it was enough, a reminder of his humanity, of the bonds of brotherhood that held the soldiers of Drydus together. For they were all in this together, all bound by the same duty, the same sacrifice. They were the shield of the Confederation, the bulwark against the alien horrors that threatened to engulf all of humanity. And though the cost was high, though the toll in blood and sanity was a weight that grew heavier with each passing day, they would endure. This was the way of Drydus, the way of the warrior. And Faustus Rice, grim gleaner of the fallen, would walk that path to the end, bearing witness to the cost of empire, shouldering the burden of the lost and the damned. For in the end, it was all for Drydus, for the dream of a galaxy remade in the image of human destiny. And no price was too high to pay for that glorious future, no sacrifice too great to bear. Even if that price was paid in the coin of their very souls. As the medic tended to the wounded soldier, Faustus stood watch, his rifle at the ready, his eyes scanning the surrounding jungle for any sign of crunchy activity. It was a tense, watchful vigil, a moment of respite stolen from the chaos of the battlefield. Around them, the grim work of the gleaners continued, the steady crack of mercy kills punctuating the distant thrum of Drydus gunships and the ceaseless buzz of the jungle's myriad insects. Faustus had long since grown accustomed to these sounds, to the grim symphony of war that was the constant backdrop of life on Crawler Prime. As he waited, his mind began to wander, drifting back to the man he had been before the war, to the life he had left behind on Drydus. He remembered the rolling fields of golden grain that stretched from horizon to horizon, the gleaming spires of the great cities rising like beacons of civilization against the clear blue sky. He remembered the pride he had felt when he first donned the uniform of the Confederation, the sense of purpose and belonging that had filled his heart. To serve Drydus, to fight for the glory of the Empire, had been his highest aspiration, his most cherished dream. But the reality of war had been far different from the shining ideal he had envisioned. The battles on Crawler Prime were not the glorious charges and sweeping victories of the history books, but a grinding, brutal slog through an unforgiving alien landscape, against an enemy that knew neither fear nor mercy. Faustus had seen things that no man should ever have to see, had done things that haunted his dreams and gnawed at his conscience. He had watched friends die in agony, had heard the screams of the wounded echo through the jungle night, had smelled the acrid stench of burning chitin and roasted flesh. And yet, amidst all the horror and the darkness, he had also witnessed moments of profound courage and selflessness, acts of heroism that shone like points of light in the all-encompassing gloom. He had seen soldiers throw themselves into the path of rampaging crunchy behemoths to save their comrades, had watched medics brave the fiercest fighting to reach the wounded, had heard the defiant battle cries of the dying as they made their last stand. It was these moments that sustained him, that gave him the strength to carry on when all seemed lost. For in them he saw the true spirit of Drydus, the indomitable will and unbreakable bond of brotherhood that had forged an empire across the stars. A sudden movement in the underbrush snapped Faustus back to the present. His rifle was up in an instant, his senses razor sharp, his body coiled for action. But it was only a wounded crunchy drone, its legs blown off by a plasma grenade, dragging itself through the muck with its remaining mandibles. Faustus put the creature out of its misery with a single, precise shot. It was an act of kindness in its own way, a mercy that the crunchies would never have shown to a wounded Drydus soldier. But that was the difference between them, the fundamental divide that separated human from alien. The medic finished his work, the wounded soldier stabilized and ready for transport back to the rear lines. Faustus helped load the man onto a waiting gravlift, watching as the silver cocoon rose silently into the air and vanished into the mist-shrouded canopy above. It was a small victory, a single life saved amidst the carnage and the ruin. But for Faustus it was enough, a glimmer of hope in the all-encompassing darkness, a reminder that even in the depths of hell, the light of human compassion could still shine through. With a final nod to the medic, Faustus turned and strode back into the battlefield, his rifle at the ready, his eyes scanning the shadows for any hint of threat. There was still work to be done, still fallen comrades to be honored and crunchy stragglers to be put down. This was his duty, his sacred charge as a soldier of Drydus. To bear witness to the cost of empire, to shoulder the weight of the lost and the damned, to fight on no matter the odds or the cost. For he knew that this war, for all its horror and brutality, was a necessary one, that the fate of Drydus, of the entire human race, hung in the balance, and he knew that he would see it through to the end, would endure the unendurable, for as long as it took. This was the way of the Drydus warrior, the path of duty and sacrifice, and Faustus Rice, grim gleaner of the fallen, would walk that path to the end, through the very gates of hell if need be. For in the end it was all for Drydus, for the dream of a galaxy remade in the image of human destiny. And no price was too high to pay for that glorious future, no sacrifice too great to bear. Even if that price was paid in the coin of their very souls. As the sun began to set over the battlefield, casting long shadows across the corpse-strewn mudscape, Faustus paused for a moment, his gaze drawn to the western horizon. There, just visible through the haze of smoke and mist, was a thin sliver of clear blue sky, a fleeting glimpse of the world beyond the war. It was a reminder, however fleeting, of what they were fighting for, of the beauty and wonder that still existed beyond the blood and the muck and the endless, grinding horror of the conflict. And it was enough to give Faustus the strength to carry on, to face another day in the green hell of Crawler Prime. For he was Drydus, and duty was his lodestar, his guiding light through the darkness. And though the road ahead was long and the burden heavy, he would not falter, would not fail. For the glory of Drydus and the dream of a brighter tomorrow. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to leave it a like. If you'd like to see more videos like this, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.